Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess the first thing to start with, tell us how you were first drawn to the Beatles. What was that moment?
Well, it was because of the Partridge Family.
Of course.
Of course, right? I was a classically trained pianist. My parents listened to Broadway and a little Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. And I had a hippie uncle, and he invited me over his house one day and said, enough of this, and I was just getting into the Partridge Family. He said, no. And he presented me with 3 of his Beatles albums. The first was Sgt. Pepper, and the others were the Magical Mystery Tour and the White Album. And before I had heard a note of music, and we were talking about this before, just the album art was incredible to me. And he went through and he said, this is a marijuana leaf, and this is why Paul is dead. And I was, 10 years old at the time, and I just was mystified, and I couldn't wait to hear what the music was going to sound like. And, I was thrilled by Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour, and then the White Album just, what was this, Revolution 9, and what was I not getting here? And ever since then, I've sort of been interested in them.
And then, so let's jump from that to going through your career of, writing music and getting involved in the field itself, and then deciding to do these lectures. How did that first happen?
So I had a very nice studio designed by a guy named John Storick, who designed Electric Ladyland, you might have heard of, and some other things. Yeah, great guy. And I was outside New York City, up the Hudson River, and I wanted all of my New York friends, my producer and composer friends, to come on out, and beer wasn't enough to get them out there. So I had to think of something else. So I decided I would put on a little talk on Sgt. Pepper. And I got a hold of some bootlegs, some rare tracks. I had a lot of Beatles books, and I decided to crack them open. And I put together my original, keynote presentation. And I had 40 people in my living room, and I was 10 minutes into the presentation, and they said, "What are you doing with this? When are you going to do it again? Will you come and speak to my college class? Will you come? There's a theater near us. You should come here." And I just started following up on some of those leads, not realizing at all. When I went to career counseling, they never said Beatles lecturer was one of my choices. So this has been a real thrill to be able to do this.
Well, they're fantastic, and like I said, I've seen several of them, and they're wildly entertaining. Where was the first one done?
So the first one that I actually did at a theater was at a place in Long Island called the Cinema Arts Theater in Huntington. And the theater director didn't really know what to do with me, because it's not a film, it's not a lecture per se, and so he set me up in their cafeteria, and he rented a screen and some big speakers, and the cafeteria backed up against the parking lot. There was a big glass wall, and I'll never forget starting the lecture. It was packed solid, and there were people outside the glass wall peering in, and I said, maybe there's something here. Yeah, and it's been interesting. I love, and you saw some of the audience shots, I do get all different types of people. I get young kids, I get college kids, and everyone comes to the Beatles with different vantage points. And it's really nice to get feedback and to see people learning more about the band, those who know it really well, and even those who know the music but don't have the context.
I think that's one of the things that that I think is so amazing about these, is even for people who think they know a lot about the Beatles, there's always something in these lectures that I didn't know.
Yeah, I learned a couple things tonight. So.
Yeah, good. And you're going to take a boat across the Atlantic, and you're going to actually do.
Yeah, so that is the plan. So there's a group called Rhodes Scholars, and one of the things that this has all led to is a cruise to Liverpool and London. I'll be teaching a course on the Beatles going across the Atlantic, and then touring Liverpool, which I've never been to, and London. So if you're interested in that, rhodesscholars.com is where you can find out about it. That's sometime in July. And then the end of February, I'm going on a cruise with Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees and the Zombies, and it's a flower power cruise, because I'm such a flower power guy. And I'll be giving some lectures on that, and it's nice as a hobby.
Fantastic. Specifically about Sgt. Pepper's, is there anything that you can speak to that has made this record last and resonate with people for so many years?
Wow. Well, I think that it all comes back to the songs. And I would say that really about the whole Beatles career, but certainly, Sgt. Pepper. These songs have become, it's like the American songbook. They're ingrained in us. We hear them, my kids heard these songs when they were babies, and I'm sure many people who have kids played Beatles music for them. And the songs are great. They're fun, they're easy to sing along, they have very clever harmonies. And when you get to Pepper, they're doing such cool things. This album I would listen to over and over again. What is that sound on Lovely Rita? And why can I not play that on my piano? It's something's different about that. And hearing that, I think it's also helps to spur creativity, I think, is hearing sounds that aren't necessarily typical. And that's why I think this album is especially great. And of course it influenced so many people. And even though there are many people who think it's not the Beatles' best album, it's certainly one of the most, or the most influential of their career. And I think it still sounds as good 50 years later.
Yeah, I agree. One of the interesting things about the record, I think, is what you talked about in the film, where Epstein is pressured into letting 2 tracks go as a single before the album is done. I wonder what the pluses and minuses of that are. I mean, everybody speculated on this, like, if they had been on the album, what 2 tracks would have been taken off, or?
Yeah, I happen to think Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane are 2 of the greatest songs ever. The songs, the production, they're just amazing. And there is always talk in Beatles fan clubs and so forth about what would you take off of Sgt. Pepper. And I have an argument why nothing could come off of Sgt. Pepper. People say, well, When I'm 64, well, that just fits that album. It's a nice break after the Indian music. It's fun. Yes, it's a McCartney-ish, kind of poppy 1920s song, but it fits. George Harrison, I think you saw tonight, I think that combination of his Indian-style music with the strings that George Martin did, that's groundbreaking. So, Lovely Rita, Fixing a Hole, they're all great songs. I would have liked to have an album with Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane in addition to all those songs, so I'll top out by giving that answer.
Right, and then the other interesting thing, I think, is that it was the first Beatles single that didn't make it to #1.
That's right.
In the UK.
Yeah.
And the record that held it out of #1 was Engelbert Humperdinck's
Release Me, yes.
It's like amazing,
release me.
amazing to think back on that now.
Wow.
And I guess lastly, you sort of touched on it at the end of the film there, but the album cover really was so integral to the power of this record and what it represented to people over the years. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that or not.
Well, if you look at the other album covers around the time, there was nothing like Sgt. Pepper. Afterwards, yeah, there was a lot of, strange fonts and things, but the closest was maybe, Revolver, which was such a wonderful album cover by Klaus Warman, of course. But this album cover, you can stare at Sgt. Pepper. You can stare at for days. I did, and try and figure out who the people are and what the different things are in that are surrounding the Beatles and what does it all mean. And there are young Beatles and old Beatles and then the lyrics. A quick story about the lyrics: when the Beatles or when John Lennon was in Spain and he was writing Strawberry Fields Forever, he was inspired because there was a school right next to where he was staying. And he would hear the school bells. I think that's what it made him think of Strawberry Field. But there was a teacher there, and there's actually a movie about this. It's a true story. Excuse me. There was a teacher who came to John and showed him that he had been translating all of the Beatles songs or writing out the lyrics to teach his kids English. And Lennon took a look at this and said, "You got the lyrics all wrong." And I tell you what, when I get back to London, I'm going to send you the lyrics, and from now on, we're going to put lyrics on our albums. And not only did he send this guy color-coded lyrics of all the songs, but Sgt. Pepper comes out with lyrics on it. And as I said, this was not done. So it was really another one of the big changes that this album brought, and had nothing to do with the music. Put lyrics on the album cover.
Groundbreaking, and a bummer for the publishers, as you said. I guess those are the questions that I had. Do we want to open it up for questions
Sure.
from the audience?
So the name of the girl who inspired She's Leaving Home is Melanie Coe, C-O-E. Yeah, and what was the second question?
What's the name of the instrument
Oh, Swarmandel, or Swarmandella, and don't ask me to spell it, but it's an Indian harp, and you hear it on Strawberry Fields Forever. You heard it on Within You, Without You. So this is the second movie that's been released. The White Album was released in November. Revolver is coming probably in March, and Rubber Soul in April. They're all different lectures, but they're all going to look like this, all filmed. And then we'll be filming some more this summer. And the plan is that these will continue in rotation. So we hope that theaters will package them, do a Beatles weekend or what have you. And so you'll see them out there for a while, and then maybe something beyond that. So how can you see the other ones? So you should sign up for my newsletter, deconstructingthebeatles.com, or follow my Facebook page, Deconstructing the Beatles, and I try and post, or my distributor posts, when new theaters are added and so forth. So you'll be notified, or you at least can see when the films are coming back. The next one to watch for is Revolver, and hopefully it will be playing right here. So, great, thank you. Where am I looking? Yes. Yes. Yes, so I found out something interesting actually this morning today at in Malibu, that right after Sgt. Pepper came out, a couple days later, Paul McCartney goes to the Seville Theater to see Jimi Hendrix. And what I found out today was he went with Peter Asher, who was a good friend, part of Peter and Gordon, later producer James Taylor and so forth, and of course brother of Jane Asher, Paul's girlfriend. And so the two of them go to see Jimi Hendrix, and Jimi Hendrix opens the show with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which for Paul, I mean, he talks about it in concert all the time. It was a big moment for him to get this sort of validation, if you will, from someone who he really admired.